Awesome. Looks like we already got 100 folks in here. So we're going to let folks trickle in. We got Aaron and Zach from THP, and we're just going to wait a couple minutes here until we get a few hundred more participants, and we'll kick her off. So a couple housekeeping things as folks are trickling in. The chat, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, use that to say, hey, I'm Bob from West Virginia. If you're just trying to chime in, throw it in the chat. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. This is going to just be a facilitated discussion throughout where you guys are able to pick Aaron and Zach's brains on the strategies that they're using to get on bucks all fall. And then, as most of you guys had the opportunity to send in questions when you registered for the webinar. So we have a bunch of those queued up as well. So we're just going to try to cover as much of that information as possible for you guys here in today's webinar. So give it a couple more minutes. And while we're waiting, Zach and Warb, tell us the hunt that you guys are most looking forward to this fall.
Probably just all of them for the most part.
Pop out answer, Warb. I need better.
As soon as we can. Like, dude, we're in the middle of the summer doldrums right now, and we're just ready to be in the woods or in the, not doing what we're doing at the moment. But, we're taking care of work and all the house crap that we need to take care of so that we can hunt for 4.5 months. So, that's all right,
Zach,
we're going to
bring the people something more concrete than that.
Well, I mean, just a little bit ago, I mean, you said try to keep it whitetail, but I'm gonna say I'm most excited to hunt elk. I mean, that's more new to me, so that's the thing I'm most excited about.
You guys talked about slinging lope for 15 minutes before we got on this thing.
Yeah,
I know you're stoked to do that.
Yeah, and that's first. So I mean, one step at a time, assuming that, you just make it to that next thing, just one at a time, just chipping away at that. So that's kind of our motto this year, I'd say. It's just like chip away at what we got going on and don't get ahead of ourselves looking too far into the future, because we did that a little bit last year, and just really in general, I feel like,
I want to go back to Arkansas bad, but it's like, that what you just said, it's like can't quite make the jump to that yet, not until I hopefully fill a tag in another place first, either here at home or out west. So if I get one of those down though, then I'll be stoked to go to Arkansas. But I can't stop thinking about going back down there. That would be awesome if we got a chance to go back.
Interesting. Yeah. Arkansas is the looming place in mind, huh?
I really want to go back there. We had a lot of fun there last year and saw some just freaking big bucks and got on all kinds of deer. It was awesome.
What time of year were you there?
Mid-December, I think.
Okay. I was in there early December last year, and it was like highs in the 80s, and I got whooped harder than I have ever been whooped in the whitetail woods.
That's good for you, though.
Yeah, that's good.
It was humbling. There's no doubt about that.
Yep. They'll do it to you. No matter where you're at, it seems like. They're tricky little critters.
Yeah. Well, sweet. We got 500 people in here as it is right now. So we're gonna dive in. I'm sure some more folks will continue to trickle in, but to go over a few housekeeping items before we dive in. So everybody, your video is off. You are on mute. So I'll repeat, if you want to just throw in some general chat, chime in who you are, where you're from, throw it in the chat. If you have questions that you would like to get in front of Zach and Warb here, throw them in the Q&A, and we will do our best to get those questions covered. Please just be respectful and courteous anytime that you're in the chat or Q&A. This is a live session, and there's obviously a ton of folks in here, so just be respectful. And we'll also be doing some giveaways towards the end of this webinar, giving away some onX gear. So stick around for that. It's only going to be available to you if you are still in the webinar when we post the giveaway links. So those will come, in about 45 minutes or so. But without that, we're gonna, learn from two very lethal hunters in the whitetail woods here for the next hour. So I first want to have Zach and Warb, you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then let's talk about deer school a little bit.
Warb, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Warb. Yeah, or Aaron, whatever you guys want to call me, I guess. That's pretty much it. Just a redneck from the Midwest who likes to hunt and make hunting videos. Never really been good at doing anything else. So, but I'm learning fast on carpentry, and that's what I was doing about 30 minutes ago. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell, Jared.
Perfect. Zach?
I'm Zach Farrenbaugh. I grew up in Ohio. Then I moved to Iowa, and that's where I met Warb and the rest of the guys at THP. And now I live in Colorado, but just I'd say, love just more than pretty much anything. I love traveling around with my friends and checking out new areas and going hunting on public land. So it's makes it easy to do your job when you love it.
Heck yeah. Love it. Well, you guys created something pretty outstanding here over the course of the last year. I think if I recall right, you guys kind of set it live on your website in December and really started putting some more emphasis into it this summer. And that's the Hunting Public's Deer School. So for those of you not familiar, Zach, Warb, and team created essentially a masterclass to help all of you guys be more successful and more efficient with the time in the field. And as an onX Hunt Elite member, you gain access to a free subset of Deer School to really walk you through the scouting portions and the planning your hunt portions. But there is so much more than that in the full course of Deer School, which you'll also get a discount to upgrade to as an elite member. But Zach and Warb, touch on what Deer School is, why you guys created it, and what value you're trying to bring to all of your viewers with Deer School.
Yeah, we basically had a ton of content, like educational content that we were producing for our channel over the years. And we had just all this stuff that would either not make it all the way into videos, because on like our YouTube channel, we're trying to keep it fast paced. We're trying to keep it entertaining. And as you know, in some of these situations, there's a lot of details that are involved. And whenever we put up one of those hunting videos, we get gobs of these questions back, like, how did you come across this spot? What types of acorns were dropping during this time frame, or whatever. I mean, whatever it is, just gobs of detailed questions about those specific situations. So we were like, man, we got to find a way that we can create a bunch of educational content for people that are trying to do this, on the DIY level like us. And that's one thing that we know how to do, is make lots and lots of videos. So in the downtime for us in the winter and in the summer for the last 2 years, we've just been making tons and tons of this educational content for the Deer School. And there's a lot of stuff in there. We just uploaded a couple more videos just in the last couple of days, but that's basically it in a nutshell, is to have a place where we can put a ton of educational content that we can't fit on our YouTube channel. And that's solely the focus of Deer School, where the YouTube channel is like entertainment. It's kind of this catch-all thing where we post all kinds of random stuff. But this is solely focused on, do-it-yourself whitetail hunting. Would you agree, Zinger?
Yeah, it's like I don't really have a whole lot to add other than I just think it's cool that it's kind of exclusive content. Like you can only get it there, and as time goes on, there's going to continue to be more and more hunts that don't make it onto YouTube that make it on to this. So it's like if you like watching hunting content, you like that education aspect of it as much as the entertainment aspect of it, that's a good place to go. It's like Aaron said, YouTube is just kind of the catch-all, and sometimes it can be a little bit ridiculous, which is fun for us to make those videos as well. But this is just a little bit more serious and to the point, I guess. So
yeah, my 2 cents on it, you guys gave me access to Deer School. I mean, I've been whitetail hunting for 2 decades, and I went through the whole course, I guess, mostly this past spring. And the amount of nuanced knowledge and just situational tactics and takeaways. I mean, I think there was like over 12 hours of curated video content on top of a couple dozen pages of written content. If you're serious about just becoming a more efficient, better whitetail hunter, you would be doing yourself a disservice by not going to THP's website and checking Deer School out. It's an incredible resource and it was built for you. So go take a look at it. But without further ado, Zach, Warb, if one of you two wants to share a map, we're gonna hop into some questions here and start to get a little bit situational. So the first question I'm gonna ask you guys is, this one came in a lot. When you're looking at an area you've never been to before, a new spot to hunt, from a topographic perspective, what are you keying in on a map?
Water. Start one. That's like point one, I would say, right? Like
But
everything
if
needs
you're
water.
really talking about looking at a topo map, especially, it's like, can you all see my screen right now, Jared?
Yep.
So like Zinger just said, water. I'm just gonna go to a random spot in Tennessee and kick it because it's on hybrid maps right now, right? Where you can, which is what we primarily would run, don't you say, Zinger? I mean, most of the time it's hybrid. That's
Yeah,
what I use anyway.
I would say that's what I
But
use.
when you jump over to topo, like Zach just said, you can really see the water and the water sources on the landscape. Obviously, if you kick it over to hybrid, you can still see some of those as well, but it's not as easy to see as it is when you go to the topo map. And like, we're looking at these streams. There's a stream right there. I don't know. Can you all see my cursor too, Jared?
Yep.
Okay. There's this stream, this Elmore branch or whatever. That's a permanent water source. And then next to it, you've got like the dotted lines that are coming off of it. That's an intermittent creek with a pond up above it. Now, those are just a couple of light details, but depending on the water situation, like, are you in an area where there's a drought or anything like that, or has there been an extended period where there's no rain? That intermittent stream may or may not be holding water. So if you're looking for a place where a buck could get old and sort of live within a home range, if you will, he's got to have permanent water. He's got to have it close by. So yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that jumps out anyway. Like exactly like you said, Zinger, like water is number one.
Do you
But where
guys,
should we go from there?
do you guys find preference on whether it's moving water, stagnant water, or is that just completely dependent on the area?
I would say that that's dependent on the area. Like, and that's just one very basic like starting point, right? Like that's not necessarily to say in every single situation that like all scouting or map scouting is honed in on like, you know, a certain distance from water. That's just kind of getting us in the ballpark, right? That's like step number one, because I would say really then the next thing is like, where is the hunting access? You know, where are people coming from? So like, that's so cliche. And I feel like if there's any questions that anybody has that like can dive into that a little bit more specific, you know, we could definitely talk and elaborate on that more. But looking at like a water source to guarantee that, you know, the deer has everything it needs, and then just trying to figure out like if there is consistent hunting pressure, where that's coming from, and how to anticipate like hunter habits within that, you know, property.
Elaborate on that hunting pressure a little bit, Zach, if you don't mind, because that question was asked a ton as far as how to identify or predict where the most hunting pressure will be. And then the other thing is like, if I am able to have boots on the ground, how do I determine what high hunting pressure is versus potential, you know, dog walking and things of that nature?
I mean, the first thing that I like to do is just get a idea of where the roads are and like what part of the terrain the roads are. So like what map we got up right now, a lot of these roads, for the most part, like the one going straight north and south in the center of the screen, Copper Mountain Lane, that's on the ridge top, right? So I like to look at that, and just kind of get an idea how the roads move through the landscape, because that may change, how appealing it is to a hunter. And then looking at trails next, like sometimes they're super obvious, sometimes they're marked, sometimes they're just something that's like cut into the forest. But looking at where the roads are on the terrain and then where the trails are, that's going to give you like the most obvious locations. And then within that, then if there's parking areas or something like that, a lot of times I'll go through those spots, and just pin like parking or access or something. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything yet. It's just kind of getting an idea of the overall area. So that's just from a mapping standpoint. Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would agree. And I'm just going to stay on this screen so that I'm not bouncing all over the place and we can both see the same thing.
Yeah.
Basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Zinger, but we're probably both thinking the same. These two roads right here on the left side of your screen are really close together. There's not very much distance in between them. I mean, it's the same scenario right here from this Rocky Mountain Road to the Copper Mountain Road. But if you go over here along the east side, there's boundary over here that's landlocked, and you have this permanent water source that's running down through it that may or may not be very deep. You could park on this road right here somewhere and go down in here and really find challenging access. So if that river or whatever that is, that creek is too high to cross, basically anything east of it could be difficult to access and could be areas over in here where people are rarely going. And on top of that, it's also increasing in elevation. So it's going to be more difficult for folks to climb up to the tops of those hills.
Yeah.
And
yeah. In comparison
versus what you've got back here.
Yeah. I think if you're looking at like in ridge country like this, not to say I, again, immediately rule them out, but I definitely take note of ridgetop roads, versus a valley road. A valley road right out of the gate is more appealing. Again, not to say that one's better than the other, because it's not always true, but like a ridgetop road is easier access for everybody. There's no terrain change versus a bottom road. Like Aaron said, right out of the gate, you got to go uphill. If that's the case, you can anticipate less hunting pressure, generally speaking, than a place people can get out of the vehicle and walk on pretty flat ground. And a lot of times on ridge tops, even if it's not a road, a trail will follow the top, whether it just be a hiking trail or like a Forest Service or just the DNR on a wildlife area or something. Like a lot of times there's some sort of road system on those ridge tops, making it easy for people to walk. So again, just taking note of all those things and kind of comparing what all the access looks like on the property. The best situation, and I guess one thing that I've been doing more and more recently is just looking like, how is there any places that you have to go up and over something, where you actually have to go from the road down low, up and over, or, even multiple times going up and down. Like that's the type of stuff that when I look at a hill country area, I'm immediately drawn to those spots, just like what we're talking about in this Tompkins Cove area. It's like,
if that road wasn't in the middle, if that Copper Mountain Road wasn't up the middle, we'd both be looking at that ridge, because that, like you said, that's quite the elevation difference from the bottom roads to get all the way up to the top. Like you're going to exert yourself getting all the way up there. And then in some places, if that road wasn't there, you could go up and over and get on those benches on the back side of it and be directly above permanent water. And then you're really getting remote and further away from people. Maybe not that far as the crow flies, but if you're hunting in hilly, steep terrain, that stuff hunts way, way bigger than flat country does. But you may only need to go a half a mile off the road and go up and over something to really put yourself into some remote country where there's very few people. But that's just an example off of the topo map question. I don't know, how far do you want us to go down these rabbit holes, Jared? I know you got lots of questions, so.
Yeah, no, I think you guys have explored this rabbit hole, and I was just gonna try to summarize it in, if you can find access that's gonna, have an uphill hike, something where you got to use a canoe or a kayak or waders, or, walk through a hellhole of a swamp for a mile. Those are the type of things that you guys are looking for to really separate yourselves from pressure.
Yeah. And I mean,
Yep.
you add other like variables as well too, like thick, which you mentioned the hellhole, but like, if you're sitting on some of these roads and you're looking straight up, you got to go uphill, not only uphill, but through a clear cut or something, or, wind damaged area. I mean, those are all reasons to keep people from accessing easily. And I think that, a lot of people like just talk so much about creative access, and that's, I mean, the beauty of creative access is you can make that whatever you want it to be, right? Like it's so many different things, and it's going to look different in a lot of situations, but really breaking down hunter tendencies, and then how could I do something different? And that's one thing, that's a question I ask myself often on public land, no matter what species I'm hunting. It's like, what is everybody doing, and what is something else I can do that's abnormal, that may just put me in a place that is overlooked.
Right on. All right, so now we're going to hop into a number of questions around some of your guys' favorite stuff, habitat diversity. So I'm going to rattle off a number of questions at you guys, just because I feel as though they're all kind of relevant within the same scope. And so what resources are you guys looking at to determine types of vegetation that you find advantageous? What are you looking at to tell key food sources on an area? And how do these affect your guys' strategies when going into an area you've never been before? So kind of, what are you looking for vegetation wise? And how are you hunting that based on what you find?
Water, number one. We're going to bring it back to that again to start. And then will you work out from there? So I don't know. Let's just pick a random spot here. I'm just zooming into Iowa. It's better for me to pick a spot on the map. Let's see here. Let's just go down through here. Okay. Around this big Indian Creek, obviously there's a drainage running down through here. And you've got, as you're going down through here, you're looking for those thick pockets. And this is a good area because there's lots and lots of diversity, right? But we're looking for the same thing in big monotonous country as well. Like a minute ago, I was just cruising through the map while Zach was talking. I found this little back corner where there was a bunch of thick cover. And I was like, that's pretty interesting. But as I was just scrolling down through this river here, as you can see, it's permanent water. You got this little point out here that you can see from the aerial. You could use, if you wanted to use your layers for like your thermal cover, you could do that and kick that on. And that's eventually going to show up once the map loads, that this is all thermal cover right around my mouse. It's mostly cedars, pines, whatever. But right there around that lower edge is a heck of a transition. And I would assume that is really high stem count, thick bedding cover. Versus a lot of these trees that are on this creek, which have probably been there forever. They're probably huge trees, maples, oaks, that sort of thing. So right up above it, you've got this thicker patch of cover. That could be good bedding cover. And even up into this ditch. Like say, let's just stay on this spot for a minute. We're also going to kick over to the topo, and boom, I see this little pond over here in the bottom right. And maybe some of you would have saw it from the hybrid view, but I did not. I did not see it until I just kicked the topo. Oh, and it's really hard to see from the hybrid view, actually. That's why you got to be using those different layers. But that's the first one that jumps out at me. And then you can just look from the aerial right here that something different is going on from this field to this field. Like this has got a food plot in it of some kind. This is hay. You can see that they've, you know, run their tractor across there quite a bit. And then on this side, I don't know if that's old pasture. It could be overgrown pasture, but there's definitely some sort of a difference right there. And if you use,
hop into your map layers there and just kind of show folks the different tree data layers, and then the crop data as well. Yeah, so
it'll take it a minute to load, probably. I may even need to back out. There you go. Okay, so you can see crop layers right here. See how that says corn, hay. This is most likely hay right here too, but you've got to go out there to double check boots on the ground. What we usually do if we're dealing with a common scenario is corn and beans anymore. So if this says corn right here, this was taken last year. So this is probably beans right now. You may need to go out to confirm that. And even as you zoom in, you can see underneath that layer, you can see the rows of corn planted in there. Now you can't always see that with the crop data layers. They'll tell you even when you can't see it. But that's the way I use it most frequently is if I'm looking at a particular property and I'm trying to figure out what's planted on it, what is the rotation? Because most of the time farmers don't double crop. So there'll be corn last year, this year's probably in beans. Hay over here, that could be a number of different things.
And so for some
What were you
clarity
saying?
on that layer, folks, is that the crop data layer. So that is all 2021 data as far as what the crop data layers are showing for crops this year. That is what they were planted in last year. So as Ward was saying, based on crop rotations, you have to do some factoring into what is going to be planted for this year, just based upon, you know, typical farming crop rotations.
I'll throw in something about the habitat diversity, like something that I guess a way that I like to explain it is like color change on a map. Like when you're actually looking at tree cover, like in these draws, for example, when you look at, it seems like, Warb, if you were to zoom into that, right in the center, there's that, yeah, I might be gone now. But regardless, when you see an area that's super high diversity, there's usually different, like size of trees is a perfect example. And you got a little bit of different color in a whole bunch of different places. Like there's a lot of texture to that map versus when you look at a solid stand of timber, it's kind of just dark green, right? Versus an area that has, you know, some tall trees, some short trees, some, you know, grasses. It's going to have a lot of color change to it. So, I mean, it's a very, very basic, like concept, but it's a starting point, right? It's like if you're scratching through a lot of different areas on a property that you can hunt, and all of a sudden you come across an area that's got a little bit of CRP and maybe you know, some timber cutting or something like that, you're going to see color change. And I think that that's just kind of an easy way to look at it on a broad scale, looking at big picture stuff.
Yeah, and this is kind of what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is kind of what you're talking about, Zinger. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah, there's
it looks
tons
like
of
right
examples.
Here, you got cedars right here along that 680-foot line as it's coming up off the creek, and then right below that, you can see the tree canopy is different. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have that layer turned on right now, so it's telling me those are cedars, but I can also see them from the aerial photo. Mm-hmm. Then you jump over here, and I don't know what that is, but it looks pretty thick. And if this was taken a year or two ago, that could be really thick by now, like chest high type cover, high stem count. Mm-hmm. And as you go across the landscape, you'll just see that consistently. Another thing that we're always drawn to, obviously water, but I just noticed this is a wetland area. down in here with marshes in it, a permanent river, and then lots and lots of diversity. So like out in here is this marsh that's probably flooded half of the time and half the time it's not. Then you have a strip of cover right along the river, because often there'll be a slight rise because of basically because of erosion, and like as the water pushes down the river, there most of them create like a little hump of dirt, and it's usually, you know, big, tall, old trees that grow right along those because they don't log them. You know, that's where you're going to find, that's consequently where you find lots of really good turkey roosting trees, is right along the edge of those rivers like that. But you can kind of see the elevation line as it curves around right there, right along the edge of the river. There will be different habitat growing right there than there obviously is 30 or 40 yards into this marsh. And then across the creek on this side, where you're probably starting to get some like oaks and pin oaks and stuff as you come away from that river. So there's a lot of diversity in a wetland area like that. Most people think about wetlands for hunting ducks, but when we see them, it's like, man, there's piles and piles of diversity. There's permanent water. There's gobs and gobs of cover.
And generally it sucks to go through.
Right.
Generally it sucks walking through that stuff.
Absolutely.
So Warp, there's a bunch of questions coming in, or comments as well on the tree data. Can you just go to the map layers there quick on your map? And open up that trees, cover, and crops. And just
I thought I had wetland on, but I just turned it on.
Yeah. And just kind of show folks, and even into layer settings, like under deciduous or coniferous, how you can decipher it down even to the specific type of tree, whether that's oak or hickory or a loblolly pine versus a longleaf pine. So that's all data that we worked with multiple partners to curate that. It's based off of timber survey. And so that is a general gist is how I would use it to get an understanding of what type of tree cover is going to be in the area. And as Zach and Warb have been talking about, like identifying habitat diversity, like where you start to see that red bleed with the brown with deciduous and coniferous, or where that orange is even better, where it's mixed. You know, that's just a very easy high level way to find an area of habitat diversity. And then you can turn those layers off so you can really analyze those color changes that Zach was talking about, and, you know, find those high stem count areas and things of that nature, which I think leads perfectly into probably the most asked question, and rightfully so for the way you guys hunt, honing in on buck bedding. I can't tell you how many different ways that question was typed, but it's been a lot. So what are you guys looking for when you're honing in on buck bedding? Will these beds persist as far as, will these bucks use the same beds now that they will be using October 1st? And then how are you telling a buck bed versus doe bedding? So just like everything that you guys can brain dump on us as far as finding and analyzing buck bedding.
I think first thing to start on that is then talking about the difference between a buck and a doe bed. That's the easiest way to start, I think. So I'll talk about that, and then Warp can talk about some different specifics. So like, just, okay, we find a bed, we're trying to decide if this is something that we think a buck is using or a doe is using. So there's a couple, you know, now this is not to say too that a buck won't use a doe bed or vice versa, because like that totally happens too. But just looking at the size of the bed is the first step, right? It's like, it's a huge bed, way bigger than anything else that you've been finding. Decent chance that that's a buck bed. Does are significantly smaller, and those beds are definitely different. When you're looking at them, they're just much smaller. And then also does tend to bed in groups. A buck is usually by himself. So a lot of times you find a single bed, you know, there's a single big bed, it's usually a buck. Now, if you find like a circle of beds, a lot of times that's does.
Could be,
especially
yep.
if you have multiple of them and they're small, right? Because, you know, when you see, like if you were to hunt a field edge, for example, it would be common to see multiple like antlerless deer coming out into that field at one time. The same thing happens when they bed. They just, mama doe's got a couple fawns, or maybe a couple does, or with 2 to 4 fawns, and they bed as a group. They do the same thing, just in reverse of the feeding habits. So multiple beds that are small, generally speaking, are going to be does, and then if you find lone big beds, those are bucks. And that's like and then also buck sign around, like if you find tracks or rubs like in or right directly around those beds, that's also telling you like, hey, buck's spending time here, so decent chance that this big bed with rubs right beside it are a buck, so yeah. I guess Ward, then why don't you talk a little bit more about specifics?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get so hung up. A lot of people are always asking that question, and I wouldn't get super hung up on whether or not it's a buck or a doe bed. I would just think about the characteristics of the bedding area. So if it's remote, if it's in a place that's kind of hard to get to, if it's really thick, if there's lots of high stem count cover in there, like you said, Zinger, if there's old and new rubs in and around the edges of it on trails that are sort of exiting that thick area, then those are all things that, and if there's permanent water really close, if there's lots of habitat diversity really close, those are all things that I think will sort of increase your odds of seeing bucks in that area. It's just the quality of the bedding area is better. When there's a lot of deer on the landscape, does are going to bed in a group, and they're going to use their eyes mostly. That's why you'll see them bedding in a circular pattern. It's because they're all looking a different direction, and they're depending on one another all the time for survival. A buck doesn't operate that way in a lot of situations. He's just worried about number one, and he's worried about scent more than anything else. So, but that aside, I would focus more on the fact, are there people in there? Is there human scent in there? And what's the thickest area around? Is there permanent water, and what's the habitat diversity look like in and around that bedding area? And sometimes that little pocket of thick stuff could be 1/8 of an acre and have half a dozen beds in it from one deer that's just been in there rotating around for a couple of days. And he may not be there for the next 2 weeks, and then he's back for a day or two. There's no one size fits all answer for it. The next bedding area that you go to may have 15 bucks in it, and it may be completely torched around all the exit trails with rubs and scrapes and everything else, and you might be in for just the craziest hunt of your life. It's hard to put it in a box. You have to think, kind of keep an open mind when you're looking for these spots. I think because a buck's bed all over the place, like they bounce around all over the landscape, but as they get older, they'll start using the best areas, quote unquote, more frequently, and that's how we can get onto them.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really important that, like, something that you and I did, Aaron, that just helped, like, put an overall, it just increased our overall knowledge of how deer bed is when we started learning about, more specifics of how to find these bedding areas. We spent like every single day scouting for like a year, looking for different examples of beds. So not necessarily getting caught up in, like you said, the difference between the buck and the doe bedding, just getting a whole bunch of examples of how deer bed. For example, if you're hunting a marsh setting, you really want to try to get as many different examples of what that could look like. That way, when you're in there hunting, it's more than looking for fresh sign going in and out of potential bedding areas. So because we did all that scouting in a variety of different habitat types and terrain types, we just like increased our knowledge of how deer bed in all those different areas a ton. So now I feel like, we can go into somewhere completely blind that we've never even been to before and say, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We're looking at this spot on the map. We're like, okay, this is, hill country example with a lot of timber. this is the type of spot that we've seen them bed in the past. Let's go see if there's any sign coming in and out of that potential bedding area. If it looks like there's a lot of, buck sign coming out of there, it's probably going to increase, that's fresh, it's probably going to increase our odds of hunting there. And there's so many different examples of how deer will bed across the country that like we could talk about this for like probably multiple months.
Yeah, I mean, we could be here for a
in.
long time.
The best thing I think you can do though is just in your hunting area, get as many reps finding beds when you're scouting, and just in general. That may be in season, it may be off season. Just anytime you see a bed, sit there and look at it and say, why is this here? What are the factors that make this deer choose to bed in this location? And you're just going to keep getting better at anticipating where the deer are bedding, depending on where you are.
Those beds on your onX. Like I go back and you start to look at these different bedding waypoints that you've marked, oftentimes that they'll be in some type of consistent spot, be that a bench in topography, be it like kind of what Warb's looking at, a finger ridge that's falling off of, a more main ridge so they can catch thermals and still be elevated. So just make sure you're marking those things, because you do not remember as much as you think you're going to remember.
Yeah, and you will see consistency, like in different habitat and terrain types. You will see a pattern, and it's like, oh, like right here, wow, and also right here, this spot looks pretty dang similar to this spot, and that will really help you anticipate that next spot.
I found this. I just want to cover this example real quick, because like Zinger said, this is so situational. It's so hard for us to generalize this. So this is literally the best thing that we've came up with, is to show people specific situations. Blue is my color for 22. So that's pretty much everything that I'm marking for the year 22 is in blue for the most part. So I just threw a couple blue pins on there. I'm just going to talk about shade. Nothing else. Early season, leaves are still on. Right here, there's a good amount of habitat diversity with these bigger trees, and then these weeds and stuff. You can see it right here in this back corner. Over here, there's a waterway with what looks like there's some lighter colored grasses, lots of different colors. That's probably canary grass or something like that. But I marked these two beds because this way is east, this way is west. In the morning, when the sun is coming up, the deer is going to bed on which side? Correct me if I'm wrong here. Right here.
Yep, you're right.
Yep. You can even see the shadows. Like this picture might have even been taken mid-morning, because you can see the shadows are pointed kind of to the northwest. If it's warm and you got warm conditions that day, and you have a buck that is living in this general area, and you've got him narrowed down to this little draw, because that's where nobody ever goes. In the morning, he may be bedded right there. And by 3 p.m., he may have switched and is bedded right over here, where the shade is hitting this side of the field. That's if it's warm. This is like down to such fine-tooth detail, because that's what occurs most of the time in their world. Like that we ran into that just a couple of weeks ago. And like Zach said, the only way that we started to predict this was to look at literally thousands and thousands of beds. And the other day, me and Nick were walking to a spot that looked just like this, and we rounded the corner and we're coming down here, and we both stopped and looked ahead of us, and was like, man, with this shade right here over this corner, with all those tall weeds and that habitat diversity that you could just see, you could see there was a bunch of different plant communities right here. We took 2 more steps and blew a buck up out of there. He was laying literally right there. Not in this exact spot, but a spot that looked very, very similar to this, but I just wanted to share that example, because that's what we're like. It's hard to generalize that question. There's so many other factors that go into it.
Yeah. And I guess I won't even get going, because if I get going, you never know when I'll get lost on.
I think that was a great example there, and just how nuanced like hunting bedding can be. I mean, Warb was just talking about finding shade from morning versus evening. And I mean, like, that's very much an early season thing versus, you know, when you're hunting bucks in November, forget about buck bedding. You're going to be hunting doe bedding because that's where the bucks are going to be. So, you know, the more
And when
time,
you're hunting in December, you're going to have your thermal cover layer on, and you're going to be looking for south facing slopes with cedars or pines right on the top of the ridge.
Then you don't want
It's
that
gonna-
shade, you know, you don't want that shade
Yeah.
if it's a sunny day, you know, but if it's a cloudy
No.
day, it's going to be a different, they're going to be, you know, drawn to a different bed. So it's all,
Yeah, and if there's a storm coming in, they're going to be right up against that thermal cover on the south side, blocking themselves from a freezing cold northwest wind, depending on where you're at. You know, if you're down in Georgia or Alabama and it's only going to get down in the 40s or whatever, deer may not move to that. But if you're in Wisconsin or Minnesota or even parts of Iowa, and you got 10 inches of snow coming in and 30-mile-an-hour northwest winds, you can start to predict where they're going to be.
Yep, I like it. So we only got about 15 minutes left with Zach and Warb here. So I'm going to throw in the chat the link to our giveaway. That's only going to be live for 24 hours. So make sure you go fill that out ASAP if you want to get entered into the giveaway. I'm also going to throw in a link. Warb, Zach, and team for the last 5 years, you know, we've been working with these guys, and they have, I think there's over 20, there's a pile of hours of scouting content, everything from hunting prairies to big woods to hunting ponds. You name the terrain type or the nuanced situation, that YouTube playlist that I just threw in the chat is going to have a video for your individual situation. I guarantee it. And so go check that out. From here, Warb, you can stop sharing your screen because we're going to talk about just some nuanced tactics that you guys are using. And the first is just because I know what you guys do on the first day of a hunt that is in a new area for you guys, just as far as really putting boots on the ground, speed scouting, and looking for hot sign. Can you guys translate what you guys are doing on that first day of hunting a new area to help all of these folks find that same success and when they're scouting?
I would say the very first thing before we actually even get out of the vehicle a lot of times is, okay, so actually before we even get there, we've got a handful of spots that we've been studying on the map. So we've looked for, you know, the water, the access, the diversity. And then the next step, once we're there, is driving around to kind of confirm from the outside what these areas look like. So as much as you're probably chomping at the bit to get in the woods and go hunting, it's really, really important to kind of go through your list of areas, because you may have, you know, I would say kind of the sweet spot would be 5 to 10 areas, right, that you're really, really interested in. But you may get there and realize, there's a bunch of people parked here, you know, I'm going to kind of cross that one off. Or you may get there and say, I didn't know there was a trail that went in right here. That's not as appealing now as it once was. You cross that one off, but then you might get to a spot where there's a bridge out that you didn't realize that people can't come, you know, from town and hit that piece of public land. So like without that knowledge, you're really already limiting yourself. So as brutal as it can be some days when you're chomping at the bit, man, you just want to go hunting and you've taken your vacation or whatever, and like you're with your buddies, but like just take the time. It's always worth it. It's always worth it, in my opinion, to just drive around. But that's kind of the first step. You got anything to add, Warb?
Yeah, beyond that, it all depends on the time frame that you're scouting in. So for example, if you're scouting on opening day and you're looking for a place to hunt that night, you've got your 5 or 10 spots or whatever it is that you're trying to efficiently scout throughout the day. What we're looking for is hot sign on the exits of bedding areas for an afternoon hunt, for example, throughout the middle part of the day. That could mean, if it just rained, that could mean big fresh tracks. That could mean droppings hitting acorns that just fell. And I don't mean like clumpy, dry deer droppings. I mean the kind where you press your boot on them and like they're flat and they just got laid down in the last 24 hours types of sign. And I would take, most of the time, I would take just a very small amount of really fresh big buck sign over a ton of mediocrely fresh sign. So like I used to hunt when I was a kid, I would hunt early season in Missouri and hunt over like 20 rubs on the 15th. That all, like if I found a big grove of them, I was like, man, there's a pile of bucks in here. Well, the reality of it is there was 2 weeks before that, or a week and a half before that, but there isn't today. Like, where are they right now? If you find a scrape and there's pee in it and you can smell the buck was there, that thing probably ain't very dang far away, especially if it's in October. If it's in November, that could be a different story, but still, we're going to pay super close attention to that ultra fresh sign, whether it's fresh feeding sign, fresh deer tracks, fresh rubs, fresh scrapes, whatever.
And I would say that what you guys just heard there is a brief explanation of what makes these guys so successful in the whitetail woods, and something that they really detail in deer school is finding that hot sign. And I know for me, like, it was not something that I abided by previous to being familiar with you guys at THP there. Just as Zach said, I'd get on my destination hunt. I'd have 6 days to hunt. And that very first morning, I'd be sitting in a tree, waiting on my buck. Whereas now I'll burn the first 2 days walking around, scouting, driving every road, and really hunt those 4 days that I have left effectively, rather than hunt 6 days haphazardly.
Yeah, I think like I look back at, similar to Aaron, like I look back to what hunting was when I was in my, my teen years, especially. And it's like, you'd go to your stand, or you'd go to one of your, you'd look at your list of stands, you'd pick the wind or you pick the stand that's best for the wind that you're dealt that day. And you go into there and you set up, and whatever comes by, comes by. And, what we do now, and that evolved so much to looking for this fresh sign, and what we do currently, it's like not even close to the same like game at this point. It's like, we don't even want to stop until we find something that's telling us, like, we will hunt on foot, moving before we ever even begin to pump the brakes if we're not finding that sign. So, sometimes
people were calling us mobile hunters 10 years ago, and we move 3 times as much as we did a decade ago.
Even 3 years ago, probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, we're always moving.
Well, that's a perfect segue. So I'm going to cut you off there. This one's for you, Zach. This one came in no less than 10 times. Ground bow hunting tactics and tips. They're looking to learn.
Just try. Just if it's something that you want to do, like whether you're afraid of heights, or you just feel like you like that style, or it might fit what you want to do. It can be whatever you want it to be. You can use it in some situations, in other situations still use a stand. You can do it all the time. It doesn't really matter, but like, you just have to start trying. You have to start. It's honestly really hard to explain, but like, you're gonna feel uncomfortable if it's something you want to do. There's gonna be times where you maybe feel uncomfortable. Like, you maybe see a buck and you're like, man, should I move over there? And it's like, try. Like, if you want to try to get closer, just try it. You're going, in all hunting, I think the one thing that, no matter what it is, I was just having a conversation about this, talking about elk with Cody from Born and Raised. It's like, the worst thing that you can do in any hunting situation is just get frozen and then like start to worry about the failure. No matter what your hunting style is, just go in and make that decision with confidence, and then stick to it, and be just be confident in what you're doing, and just have fun. Like, you're gonna fail. It doesn't matter what your style is on the given day. Like, at some point you're gonna fail again, and just learn from that and keep improving the next time. It's the easiest. It's the most like short answer that I can give about that, I think
that's fair. I think you personally have sparked a lot of intrigue on hunting from the ground, myself included, and I've only failed so far.
Yeah, I mean, we all fail, man. It's honestly, like, you got to almost learn to love failure if you're going to be a hunter. Again, no matter what your style is, right? Like, you have to learn to appreciate that failure. Now, I'm not saying I don't have the days where I'm like, we all do, like when something happens bad and you're just mad, like may take a couple days, maybe even a couple weeks, months, whatever, to recover from that failure. But like especially going into the next season, or not even really that, but by the time the next hunt comes around, you got to be clear of that mistake and move on. It's like, if you harp on it, you're just gonna keep making more mistakes.
All right, so we're coming up pretty close to time. We got 5 minutes left. I want to ask each of you one last question, and that is, what is your favorite type of habitat to hunt? And I want a clear, decisive, non-cop out.
Oh, this is easy. This is easy.
Go
Or
for
if
it.
you go first, I'll go first. This is easy for me. I mean, give me something open where like it's just open and I can get up high and glass it. Like, if it's open and you can have the potential of seeing deer bed down, that's where, like, I could not feel more confident. If I could know exactly where he's at, just from
So
a
you're
visual.
talking like a North Dakota or Nebraska, or
Not even that though. Like, even found it when I was hunting in Iowa. I found it in Ohio. I found it in New York. I found it in a lot of places. So, like, just find an open country where deer are visible and you can be patient from a glassing standpoint or just a visual standpoint, not necessarily even set up to kill. You're set up to get eyes on. And that's like, I mean, there's nothing more fun than that.
I agree with that. But I can't pick a favorite, man. I just like hunting. I know, I'm sorry. I just like hunting on all the different situations that we've been in over the years. It's like every time you go into a new situation that you're unfamiliar with, it really tests your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And you learn so much. You fail most of the time, but you learn so much about it. Like when we went into those marshes last year in Arkansas, where there was no trees for 3 miles that were bigger than your calf. Like, it was nuts compared to hunting in mountainous terrain in the southeast or out east, with nothing but big woods for miles and miles and miles and very monotonous habitat. So like every time you go into a new situation like that, you're going to grow as a hunter, because your brain is going to be challenged to figure out all those different scenarios and situations.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that in your own home state. You can bounce around and go boom, 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 boom. So it's hard for me to pick one, I mean, heck, within an hour of the house, I got 45 different habitat scenarios, if I really think about it. And I just love going to each of them and seeing how things play out.
Yeah, I will add on, like, I think when it's open like that, that's my favorite to have high confidence. But like, one of my favorite things in the world is to go to a big timber setting, because it whoops me mentally a lot. Like, there's a lot of days where that's really hard. And
yeah,
honestly,
but when you finally get one, it's like,
yeah,
dude, holy crap.
Yeah, because like, it's like in the stuff you feel confident in, like, your expectation is that I know what I'm doing here. So when you go to those areas, it's like, so let's put it this way. I would never give up hunting, challenging areas just to hunt the stuff I feel the most confident in. I think the balance is really, really important, because like Aaron said, that's what's going to make you a better hunter, and that's what's going to make you grow your skill set. So, but give me something bedded, and I love that situation.
Yeah.
No doubt there's more reward walking into some new area that you've never been to and coming out with a buck.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, Ward, really appreciate the time and knowledge that you guys have shared with us here. To all you folks still on, all 513 of you, sure appreciate you guys spending, an hour with us. Tune in to the hunting public. You guys are going to start dropping hunting videos when? Pretty soon here.
Soon.
Oh yeah, the boys are cranking on elk stuff right now. It's going to be wild here in a couple weeks.
So make sure you go over to YouTube, subscribe to the hunting public. You're really not going to find any more entertaining outdoor content that exists anywhere in the world. So these guys.
Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, thanks, dude.
They're as good as it gets. And so again, appreciate having you guys on. Thanks everyone for coming out, and best of luck this fall.
thanks for having
Thanks,
us. And
everybody.
thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been fun.
All right. Take it easy, y'all.